we often wonder why things are the way they are. And why did men and women start doing different jobs a long time ago? This is a question many people ask. It's about how we lived way back when. It's about how our ancestors organized their lives. It's not a simple answer. It didn't happen overnight. Nobody sat down and made a rule. Instead, it was a slow process. It grew out of everyday life. It grew from the struggle to survive. It was very practical. It had a lot to do with biology. It also had a lot to do with the environment. Imagine life thousands and thousands of years ago. We are talking about when humans were hunter-gatherers. This was before farming. People lived in small groups. They moved around a lot. They followed animals. They looked for plants. Every single day was about getting food. Every single day was about staying safe. It was a hard life. It was a dangerous life. There were no supermarkets. There were no doctors. There were no houses like ours. Survival was the main goal. It was the only goal. Everyone in the group had to contribute. If people didn't work together, they didn't make it. The group would die out. So, decisions about who did what were very important. They weren't just personal choices. They were choices that affected everyone. One of the biggest factors was human biology. Well, women are the ones who bear children. This is a simple fact. It's how our species continues. And for a very long time, women also nursed their babies. This was the only way for babies to get food. There was no formula milk back then. A woman would be pregnant for 9 months. She would then give birth. After that, she would nurse her baby for a few years, sometimes even longer. This process made a big difference. It meant women had less mobility. They couldn't move as freely as men. They had a baby or a young child with them. Carrying a baby on a long, strenuous hunt was not practical. It was not safe for the baby. It was not safe for the mother. It would slow down the hunters. It would make noise. It would scare off game. It just wasn't a good idea. Think about it. A woman with a newborn couldn't run fast. She couldn't climb trees easily. She couldn't carry heavy things over long distances. Not while also carrying a baby. Her energy was also going into growing a baby. Then into feeding a baby. This is physically demanding work. It uses a lot of calories. So the tasks she could do were naturally limited. They had to be tasks that allowed her to stay closer to camp. They had to be tasks that allowed her to keep her child safe. They had to be tasks that weren't too dangerous. They had to be tasks that weren't too physically demanding in short, intense bursts. And then there's the general difference in physical strength. On average, men are physically stronger than women. This is also a biological fact. It's about muscle mass, it's about bone density. This doesn't mean every man is stronger than every woman, but on a population level, it's true. This difference matters a lot when survival depends on physical labor. Hunting large animals required significant strength. It required endurance. It required the ability to throw spears hard. It required the ability to drag heavy carcasses back to camp. These were jobs that men were generally better equipped for. They could run faster for longer. They could throw harder. They could lift more. This wasn't about being better people. It was about physical capabilities. It was about what helped the group survive. So, these biological realities laid a foundation. Women were tied to childbearing and child rearing. Men had, on average, more physical strength for certain tasks. This led to a very natural division of labor. It made sense for the group. It maximized efficiency. It increased the chances of survival for everyone. Let's look at the specific tasks. Hunting was often done by men. It involved tracking animals. It involved long treks away from the camp. It was dangerous. Hunters faced wild animals. They faced other groups of humans sometimes. They faced injuries. They faced the risk of getting lost. They needed to be able to move quickly and silently. They needed to react fast. They needed to be strong enough to overpower an animal or deliver a killing blow. And they needed to carry the kill back. This could be a very heavy load. These tasks fit well with men's general physical attributes and their relative freedom from child-rearing duties. Gathering, on the other hand, was often done by women. This involved collecting plants. It involved collecting berries. It involved collecting roots. It involved collecting nuts. These things could often be found closer to the camp. They didn't require long, dangerous journeys. A woman could take her children with her while gathering. She could teach them about edible plants. She could keep an eye on them. It was a more predictable activity. It was less dangerous. It provided a steady, reliable food source. Hunting was feast or famine. Gathering was the daily bread. It was the constant food. It balanced out the uncertainty of the hunt. and gathering required deep knowledge. We women became experts in botany. They knew which plants were safe to eat. They knew which ones were poisonous. They knew when and where to find different plants. They knew how to prepare them. This knowledge was passed down from mother to daughter. It was crucial for survival. It was a different kind of strength. It was the strength of knowledge and sustained effort. These roles weren't chosen because one gender was better than the other. They were chosen because they were effective. They were complementary. The hunters brought the meat. The gatherers brought the plants. Together, they made a complete diet. Together, they fed the group. Both contributions were vital. One was not more important than the other. Without gathering, people would starve during periods of unsuccessful hunting. Without hunting, people would lack protein and fat, especially in certain environments. It was a partnership. It was a system that worked. Over time, people became very skilled at their specific tasks. Men who hunted became better hunters. They learned the habits of animals. They learned how to make better weapons. They learned how to track. Women who gathered became better gatherers. They knew their foraging territories intimately. They knew how to process plants. They knew how to make baskets. They knew how to prepare food for storage. This specialization made the whole group more efficient. It improved their chances of survival. It meant everyone benefited from everyone else's expertise. This division of labor also shaped tools. More hunting tools like spears and bows were developed. Digging sticks and grinding stones were developed for gathering and processing plants. The tools themselves often reflected and reinforced the gendered tasks. A spear needed a certain kind of strength and skill to use effectively. A digging stick needed a different kind of skill and patience, but it wasn't always a strict, rigid line. There was flexibility. Sometimes women would hunt smaller game. Sometimes men would gather, especially if the main hunter was injured, or if there were many children in the group, or if the environment changed. Survival was the priority. So people adapted. But the general pattern remained. The general tendencies were strong. These tendencies became the norm. As human societies developed, these patterns became ingrained. When people started farming, the division of labor changed again. But it often followed similar lines. Men might clear the land. They might plow with animals. They might handle heavier tasks. Women might plant the seeds. They might tend the crops. They might harvest. They might process the food. They might care for the children. They also often cared for domesticated animals near the home. Farming often meant more children. More hands were needed for labor, more mouths needed feeding, and women were still bearing and nursing those children. So the work done close to home, work that could be paused or done with children present, still often fell to women. And then culture started to play a huge role. Once a pattern is established, people start to think of it as natural. They start to think of it as the way things should be. Stories were told. Myths were created. These stories often explained why men do certain things. They explained why women do other things. Children learn these roles from a very young age. The boys watched their fathers and other men. Girls watched their mothers and other women. They learned the skills. They learned the expectations. They learned what it meant to be a man or a woman in their society. These expectations became very powerful. They shaped how people saw themselves. They shaped how people saw others. If a woman tried to do a man's job, or vice versa, it might be seen as strange. It might be seen as wrong. It went against the established order. This wasn't always because of malice. It was often because the division had worked for so long. It was because it had been successful. It was because it was familiar. People are generally resistant to change, especially when the old ways seem to ensure survival. For example, a young boy would learn to track animals with his father. He would learn to aim a spear. He would learn to respect the hunt. A young girl would learn to identify edible roots with her mother. She would learn to weave baskets. She would learn to care for younger siblings. These were not just tasks. They were rites of passage. They were how children became adults. They were how they learned their place in the world. They learned how to contribute to the group. This cultural reinforcement meant that even when the direct physical need for the division lessened a little, the division itself continued. It became a tradition. It became part of identity. It became part of the social fabric. It was passed down through generations. People didn't question it much. It was just the way things were. It had always been this way. And it's important to understand that this division wasn't necessarily seen as unfair in its origins. It was seen as functional. It was seen as necessary. Everyone had a role. Every role was important for the group's survival. The idea of fairness or equality, in the way we think about it today, is a much more recent concept. For early humans, it was about effective group survival. It was about filling all the necessary roles to keep everyone alive. Now, things are very different. Modern technology has changed almost everything. Your physical strength is not as critical for most jobs today. We have machines. We have tools that make tasks easier. We don't have to hunt and gather for our food. We don't have to walk for miles to get water. We don't have to build our shelters with only our hands. Many of the tasks that were once gendered due to biological and practical reasons are no longer so. And childbearing has changed too. While women still bear children, how we raise them is different. We have formula milk, we have childcare, we have flexible work arrangements. Fathers are much more involved in daily childcare. The direct limiting impact of childbearing and nursing on a woman's ability to participate in the broader labor force is much reduced. Because of these changes, the old divisions of labor no longer make as much practical sense. We see this changing in many societies around the world. Women are doing jobs that were once only for men. Men are doing jobs that were once only for women. Our understanding of gender roles is evolving rapidly. We are moving away from the rigid divisions of the past, but the legacy of those ancient divisions still affects us. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's obvious. We still have gender stereotypes. We still have biases about what men and women should do. These stereotypes come from thousands of years of human history. They come from a time when those divisions were truly necessary for survival. They served a purpose then. But that purpose has largely faded away. So, when we look back at why labor started dividing by gender, we see a story of practicality. We see a story of adaptation. It began with very real biological differences. It began with the harsh demands of survival. Women's roles in childbearing and nursing were central. Men's average physical strength and freedom from these roles were central too. These differences led to complementary tasks, hunting for men, gathering, and childcare for women. These roles worked together. They ensured the group got food. They ensured children were raised. They ensured everyone had a chance to live. Then these practical divisions became cultural. They became traditions. They became expectations. They were reinforced by stories. They were reinforced by what children learned. This made the divisions very strong. They lasted for a very long time. Even when the reasons for them started to change, the patterns remained. It wasn't a malicious system. It wasn't designed to oppress. It was a functional adaptation. It was a way for early humans to organize themselves. It was how they faced a very difficult world. It helped our species survive. It helped us get to where we are today. And understanding its origins helps us understand why we are still talking about gender and work today. It helps us see where some of our current ideas about gender come from, and it helps us to think about how we want to organize our lives going forward. Because the world has changed a lot, and our ways of living can change too.